All right, Agatha All Along, episode 6. Let's talk about it in full spoilery detail. If you have not seen Agatha All Along, episode 6, make sure to just save this segment or save the entire podcast if you're listening to the entire podcast for later. And you can always skip around to different segments. There are always time codes in the description of the actual podcast in the description below. So make sure to skip around, watch later, save this video for later. And otherwise, let's dive into Agatha All Along, episode 6, a spoiler discussion. So just to recap, as I always do with my thoughts about the previous episodes, I've been a little bit on the fence with this show. It hasn't been a total disaster or anything like that, but it certainly hasn't been anything that I'm going to write home about. So I would equate this to something in between my experience with Moon Knight and with maybe She-Hulk, for example. I think that both have a lot of promise, and I enjoy both to varying degrees. And I think Agatha kind of fits in the middle of, there are really good moments, there are some interesting concepts, there are some funny laughs to be had, and some good action, maybe some horror elements. But on the whole, it just doesn't feel like a show that was built for me, and it doesn't feel like it's quite working for me, just in general. And I think that part of the reason, like I've been explaining over the last few episode spoiler discussions, is because of the very formulaic way that they're approaching the show with the Witch's Road and the trials. And, we got a little bit of a break from that in this episode, which I appreciated. It looks like we are heading right back to another trial in the next episode. A little bit of a bummer there. But, I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to say this episode was probably one of the top 2 best episodes of the show so far. I'm not sure, because I think at the beginning I said, this is easily the best episode of the entire series. I'm not so sure. I think maybe episode 1 will give this one a run for its money. This episode and episode 1 pair very well together. I think Jack Schaefer being the showrunner for Agatha All Along, and also one of the head writers for WandaVision. So you get clear connections here between WandaVision and Agatha All Along. But, I think that there are some very clear parallels here going on between episode 4 of WandaVision. Remember that one, where everything was unveiled and we understood what was going on in the Hex, and started to learn about the sitcoms, and we met Darcy and Jimmy and Sword, Agent Hayward. So, that episode really recontextualized everything that was going on before it. And this episode, I think this episode 6 and episode 1 pair very nicely together in that way as well. I think that is a really good part of the show, and I think that this episode is good. I really enjoyed it, and I'm just a little bit nervous that we're going to head back to the more formula-based writing and formula-based stories of the past 3 episodes. But let's talk about this episode 6. So we ended last episode with the reveal, obviously, that Joe Locke is playing Teen, and it is pretty much apparent. In fact, in the promo for episode 6, they were all basically revealing this is Billy Maximoff. So here we go. We are heading into a little bit of a larger episode, because I always like to do this, especially with these Marvel Disney Plus shows, where for Penguin, every single episode is an hour long. That it's reliable. Marvel just likes to make random episode lengths, and they're usually pretty short. This one was pretty long in terms of Marvel. It was 47 minutes with credits, and I think about 43 minutes without credits. So not too bad, not too shabby. Would have liked for these episodes to be a little longer, but I think just seeing that episode length, especially last episode compared to last episode, which was something like 28 minutes without credits, crazy, criminal almost. This was a lot better in that regard. So we start out here, and we are at, I think, a bar mitzvah for Teen, and Teen happens to be a person named Billy Kaplan, who, for those of you who don't know the comic book origins of Wiccan, who is Billy Maximoff, basically Billy Maximoff, it's a character named Billy Kaplan, who essentially turns out to be a fragment of the soul of one of Wanda's kids, aka Billy, and so they're kind of loosely adapting this here. I have a lot of questions, as you'll see, especially towards the end of the episode. I have a lot of questions for how and when and why and what's going on here, but we'll save those for later. For now, we're watching the beginning of the episode, and it's very clear, okay, this is a different character. This guy's name is William Kaplan, and this isn't Billy, but we know that he does become Billy later, so we're just trying to figure out what's going on. I thought it was interesting that, the soul of Billy Maximoff entered another person named Billy. I don't know if that was intentional, if basically as soon as the Hex was disappearing, he was like, find me another Billy nearby, and he found William Kaplan. I don't know, but I just thought that was kind of interesting anyways. So what's also interesting is that it seems like Billy meets Lilia before anything happens, which I think is kind of random. They don't actually explain this because it turns out that he has some sort of connection with all three of the other witches on the Witch's Road. For example, he sees a video with Jennifer Kale. He is listening to the music of Alice's mother, and he actually has met Lilia before, albeit as Billy Kaplan. So I don't know if that'll be explained in later episodes, that maybe he was intentionally trying to get Agatha to recruit these witches, and there was something going on there. But I think I find that interesting that he had somehow met these witches beforehand, because maybe that'll play into later episodes, or maybe it's just a massive coincidence that all this was happening with the same people that he had met before or had some vague connection with before, I suppose. So, I think that the Lilia scene was interesting, and I also think it's interesting that Lilia was the one who put the sigil on him, and then she, I guess by witch rules, if you put the sigil on a person, you're also liable to forget. And I don't know, maybe she sent something, bad omens with this kid or something. I don't, because she's able to see into the future, I guess, into the past, and so maybe she saw that this kid was going to be Billy Maximoff, and then she was like, yeah, I don't want to know anything about it. I want to forget about it. And she went on her way. I don't know. Maybe that's what's going on here. So then we get more of the backstory of what's going on. So it turns out that this bar mitzvah is happening on the same day as the Westview hex going down. And so this is, I'm sure all the sword agents are there, and it's the final confrontation between Agatha Harkness and Wanda Maximoff, and Vision obviously is there. And so that's the backdrop that's happening on, going on there. And then we have the car crash that basically kills William Kaplan, and then Billy Maximoff's soul enters this body. And, at this point, I'm saying to myself, this is easily, I think, the best episode of the show thus far. I'm just waiting to see where this goes, but so far it feels a little more grounded. It feels more interesting, while still dealing with the ramifications of WandaVision, which I love. Again, as somebody who adores WandaVision, I always love revisiting that show, and even hearing the early sitcom episodes on the radio as they're driving away was also something that was really fun for me as well to hear. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, what a really tragic, sad turn of events for the Kaplan family, as thankfully the parents are not injured, but then they basically lose their son because this new boy has what they think is amnesia, but instead, it's basically a new spirit of a made-up person. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm still a little bit confused. But then we get the scene where Joe Locke returns to their home. And I actually think that here, Joe Locke is doing some of the best acting that he's done in the series thus far. Because in the series thus far, in fairness, now that we know in hindsight, it's a little more understandable what he was doing, kind of faking being all excited and whatever, and then he's kind of letting out a more sinister side at the end of this episode and at the end of the last episode. But here, it's basically Billy Maximoff playing, being confused. He doesn't know where he is. He's in this body that he doesn't recognize. He's in this house that he doesn't recognize, and he does a really good job. Joe Locke does a really good job of portraying all of those confused emotions. The other interesting thing, because I guess I remember in WandaVision that, sure, Billy Maximoff could kind of read minds, but in the way that, when Vision was in trouble, he could just hear Vision's voice vaguely if he concentrated on it. Sure, that's fine. But I also think that it's not set up super well that he can just randomly read minds, and I don't know. For me, at least, it felt a little bit out of left field, because it took me a second to be like, was this something that the kid could do in WandaVision? I guess so, but not in this way where he's literally able to hear everyone's thoughts, which, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, honestly. I feel like it wasn't executed super well or super interestingly, just because it kind of came out of left field for me. But we'll see. We'll see where this goes. And so then we're doing, we're recontextualizing earlier parts of the show. His fanboyness, I guess, in the earlier parts was more of a facade. And then we get to meet his boyfriend, who is Eddie. And so I've already read some things about Eddie, and, is because apparently in the comic books, and again, I'm not super well versed in the comic books, but Wiccan is in a relationship with Hulkling, who is Teddy, I guess. So is Eddie Teddy? Is this guy Hulkling? Because apparently Hulkling is part part Kree and part Skrull or something like that. So I don't know. Honestly, I have no idea who this character is. He could be Hulkling. It could be, I don't know. But it's, we get to meet Wiccan's boyfriend. And I guess there's that. If I keep referring to him as Wiccan, I keep interchanging names now. Teen, William Kaplan, Billy Maximoff, Wiccan. Wiccan is basically the superhero name for Billy Maximoff in the comic books. And I'm sure he's going to get that moniker at some point in this show. So yeah, they are talking about all the things that are going on here in Westview, and they're actually it's really interesting. They disguise WandaVision. Apparently, the real world explanation for WandaVision is that they thought it was an Avengers training exercise, which I feel like has been in another MCU project. I'm trying to remember it now, but anyways, that's a really interesting thing to bring up here as well. Then we get a scene where he's trying to figure out everything about the magic and about Westview, and he runs into Evan Peters, Ralph Boner. So we get to see Ralph, and yeah, here he is again. I'm not gonna lie, Ralph was not my favorite part of WandaVision. In fact, if there was one part that I think I really disliked from WandaVision, it was the way that they handled the Quicksilver situation. And I'm not mad about the fact that they didn't make Evan Peters the Fox X-Men Quicksilver. You can go back on the channel. I did week by week reviews and spoiler discussions of all 9 episodes of WandaVision, and I said, you can go, it's on the record. I said, no, this is not the Fox X-Men Quicksilver. And I was right. He wasn't. But it feels like such a waste for what they did with the character to just make it a joke. And I actually wish, in hindsight, that they had asked Aaron Taylor Johnson to come back and they just had a manifestation of Quicksilver be the person who shows up at our doorstep in episode 5, I think, or episode 6? I can't remember. But of WandaVision. But yeah, and the way that they handled Quicksilver, or Ralph, I guess, was a little bit disappointing for me in that show. Anyways, it's nice to see Evan Peters in another show, in another MCU show. He is going a little over the top, a little crazy to be sure, but still it's played off for laughs at least. So yeah, we get our first inklings of Tommy, and it seems like that is really going to be the thrust of the rest of the show, which we'll talk about at the end as well. Tommy Maximoff. And we'll get there as well. So then they have the conversation here between Ralph Hulkling and he's not Hulkling, between Ralph, Eddie, and Billy, and then Billy goes back and basically just tries to find everything about Agatha through Google. And honestly, this is one of my first, and it feels like a nitpick, so I don't want to say it's a nitpick, but maybe it is a nitpick, but one of my first big gripes with the in-universe continuity and whatnot of this episode is that how are you going to find everything you want to know about Agatha Harkness through Google? That just doesn't make sense to me. I don't quite understand how you got from that point to all of a sudden being like, okay, I know that Agatha walked the Witch's Road. That's just on Google. That's on online forums. Is it really? I don't know. I don't really buy that. But it's made even more abundantly clear now that he doesn't actually want Wanda back, because I don't know. Actually, I don't quite know why he doesn't want Wanda back, but he doesn't want Wanda back. He actually wants his brother back. So there is that. The other really big gripe I have with this episode is that all of a sudden, this guy, right? Because sure, Billy Maximoff has magic in him. That's fine. That's all you needed to say, right? This is the problem with this show to me, honestly. One of the problems with this show to me is that the way that they're treating magic, because in WandaVision, Billy Maximoff, or Wanda Maximoff for that matter, didn't need to spin around and didn't need to say Latin words to get magic out. They just had magic in them, right? Billy Maximoff at the end of WandaVision just had magic. Even in the Halloween episode, he just had magic, right? It's not like he had to spin around and say Latin words to get there. And so that's all you needed to say for this reincarnated version of Billy Maximoff. But instead, now we all have to be saying Latin words and sounding kind of silly in my personal opinion. And the other thing that leads to is that basically he just has a book of spells now. And it just makes me wonder, can anyone in the MCU just grab this book of spells? Like, I think it would be really silly, honestly, if Doctor Strange had to just be reciting spells all the time or whatever when he was waving his hands around. I think that would just be really silly. So what, if anyone gets their hands on this book of spells, then they can just, say Latin words and break Agatha Harkness out of her spell? I don't know. It just feels too convenient. It feels so rushed to me that this guy, Billy Kaplan, Billy Maximoff in this body, living a normal life, can all of a sudden just be good at magic again by reading books, about magic, by reading spells. It doesn't make sense to me. So those are a couple of the bigger gripes I had with this episode. But anyways, we move on here, and he goes and confronts Agatha. It is actually really interesting to see Agatha under the spell from an outsider's point of view. I think that is actually quite interesting. And Agatha, Catherine Hahn, acts that really well. She always does. She has really just gone crazy under Wanda's spell, which I think is a really fun choice here for Catherine Hahn. And then, yeah, it's all well and good. It's all, it's better than before. But somebody, again, just needs to explain to me how how Billy just mastered all this magic in a short period of time. That's really what I'm hung up on at the end of this episode. It's like, how did he get from amnesia, oh, I don't really know who I am, to 3 years later, I know magic now, but also I don't know magic well enough that I have to read Latin words out of a book. It just doesn't quite track for me, but maybe that's just me. So we're back to present time now, and we know Billy's endgame now, as Agatha points out. It's to get Tommy. So I guess we know what Billy is after. To be honest with you, I feel like that's a little underwhelming for me, because I never really cared about Billy or Tommy as characters in WandaVision, and so to think like maybe he'll probably show up at the end of this show is like, okay, yay, we got Tommy back, but then I don't know what happens. By the way, one of the funniest lines in the episode was, "You're after Toby," which I actually laughed out loud. I don't know why. I thought that was really funny from Agatha. But yeah, I mean, sure, the stakes are to get Tommy back, and honestly, it's not a character that I particularly had any attachment to. And last episode, I did a segment about the latest MCU rumors, and apparently there are rumors going around that a Tommy Shepard project is happening, and I didn't believe it at the time. I still don't, but I mean, it's getting kind of hard to believe that there won't be a presence of Tommy Shepard in the MCU moving forward. How, where, when, I don't know. Maybe in the Vision Quest series or whatever that is. But yeah, it seems hard to believe that, there won't be Tommy Maximoff by the end of this show. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, the other weird thing that I was trying to piece through here is that because I mean, look, you can say, and I maybe they will say, or maybe they won't say it later, but you can say that Billy Maximoff in Wanda's Hex was a part of Wanda's soul that she manifested, just like how she told Vision that he was a part of the Mind Stone that was her, and whatever. So I guess you could say that, but my point is that, I mean, sure, these things in the Hex can have sentience while they're in the Hex, like Billy and Tommy, but do they have enough sentience that they can manifest in a soul in another body in the real world? That just feels like a little bit of a stretch here. So there are a lot of things going on here that just aren't explained super well, in my opinion. Not to mention that I'm still wondering what Agatha Harkness's end game is, really, because is she just after power? Is that all she wants? I mean, if that is, fair, but it doesn't make for a super interesting character storyline, in my personal opinion. And if Billy is just going after Tommy, great. I'd like to see it. I thought it would have been a little more compelling if he was trying to get his mother back, not purely, just to get Elizabeth Olsen back in the MCU. That's really, honestly, I've made segments before that I've said maybe that's not a good idea, but just for the character, it would have been a little bit more interesting, because obviously Wanda has history with Agatha and whatnot, and also Wanda was teased at the beginning of this show, so we'll see. But and by teased, I mean her, the dead body was there, so we'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, overall, I enjoyed this episode. I think that this is one of the best episodes that this series has done. Not saying a whole lot, because I haven't really loved any episodes. I've liked a few, but I think that this is, up there with the episodes that have been released thus far. I'm just a little bit, I suppose I'm underwhelmed a little bit by all the twists and turns that are going on here, because I think that the execution is pretty good. In fact, the backstory towards the beginning is really interesting, but I'm just hoping that now that we know the roadmap going forward, and granted, it's better that we know now than if we know, knowing right before the finale, which is usually what happens with these MCU Disney Plus shows. But I'm just a little concerned here that, okay, we have this roadmap, and it feels a little bit anticlimactic, I guess, that, okay, we're walking the witch's road and he wants his brother, a character that we really haven't had any reason or time to be attached to, so far in the MCU, and we'll just have to see. But guys, let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of Agatha All Along episode 6? I personally liked it. I think that it's a step in the right direction, although I'm worried that this show is going to kind of just head back into the formula territory, but we'll have to see about that. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about Agatha episode 6.